You paid $6 for that Big Mac. Ground beef, a slice of cheese, some shredded lettuce, a sesame seed bun, a spoonful of special sauce. If you bought every one of those ingredients yourself at a grocery store and made this exact sandwich at home, it would cost you under $1. So where did the other $5 go? Not to the cow, not to the wheat field. Somewhere between the farm and your hand, this burger passed through one of the most efficient and most misunderstood money machines on the planet. A machine that sells 68 million meals a day in more than 100 countries and somehow makes the math work every single time. Today we're taking it apart piece by piece, dollar by dollar. By the end, you won't be able to look at a fast food menu the same way again. But first, a quick detour because this burger almost didn't exist. The Big Mac wasn't invented in a corporate boardroom. It was invented in 1967 by a McDonald's franchisee named Jim Delegati, who ran several locations in Pennsylvania and wanted something bigger on his own menu to compete with local diners nearby. He built it himself, tested it in his own restaurants, and priced it at 45 cents. It sold so well locally that headquarters eventually rolled it out nationwide and then worldwide. It's a detail worth sitting with for a second. The single most iconic fast food product on the planet wasn't designed top-down by the company. It was built bottom-up by a franchisee trying to solve a local competition problem. And it worked so well, it became the exact system we're about to take apart. Now back to what's actually inside it, because this is the part everyone assumes is the expensive part, and it isn't. 2 beef patties, a slice of American cheese, shredded lettuce, chopped onions, pickles, a 3-part sesame seed bun, and the special sauce. That's the entire ingredient list. Nothing exotic, nothing imported from across the world, nothing that requires special handling. Restaurant food cost analysts generally estimate that the raw ingredients in a fast food sandwich like this run somewhere around $1 to $1.20, and beef is the single largest piece of that. The bun, the cheese, the vegetables, the sauce, all of that adds up to maybe 30 or 40 cents combined. Cheap, standardized, ordered in bulk from a small handful of approved suppliers, delivered on a schedule so tight that a restaurant rarely holds more than a few days of inventory at once. That means, roughly speaking, the food itself is responsible for well under a quarter of what you paid. Everything else, the other 3/4 or more, is a story about people, buildings, cattle markets on the other side of the planet, and one very specific corporate relationship we'll get to shortly. Let's stay on that beef for a moment, because it connects this one sandwich to a genuinely massive global industry. A company the size of McDonald's needs an enormous, constant supply of ground beef, sourced through long-term contracts with major meat suppliers across multiple countries, not from any single ranch or region. That scale is exactly why a Big Mac's cost is so sensitive to things that have nothing to do with restaurants at all. A drought that shrinks cattle herds in one part of the world, a disease outbreak that limits exports from another, a spike in the price of the corn and grain used to feed cattle. None of that happens inside a kitchen. All of it still ends up on your receipt. When ground beef gets more expensive at the grocery store, it is very often getting more expensive at the drive-thru window at almost exactly the same time, for exactly the same underlying reason. So what fills that other 3/4 of the price? The first big piece is labor. A typical McDonald's location runs with somewhere between 15 and 30 employees across a week. Cooks, cashiers, drive-thru staff, someone keeping the lobby clean, a manager juggling the schedule. Most of them are part-time. Quick-service restaurant labor costs are usually estimated at around 25 to 30% of total sales, and that number has been climbing for years as minimum wages rise across different states and countries. That's why you've probably noticed self-order kiosks appearing in more and more locations, along with mobile ordering apps and, in some markets, experiments with automated drink pouring and frying equipment. it isn't really about convenience for the customer. It's a direct response to labor being one of the largest, fastest growing costs in the entire business. Every kiosk, every app order, every piece of kitchen automation is in a very real sense a line item on a cost reduction spreadsheet, long before it's a feature on an App Store page. Then there's the building itself. Rent, electricity for the grills and fryers running continuously, water, waste disposal, equipment maintenance, insurance. In the fast food industry, occupancy costs, rent and related building expenses, commonly run in the range of 6 to 10% of sales, and inexpensive city locations, sometimes noticeably more. A McDonald's on a busy corner in a major city pays a very different rent than one off a highway exit in a small town, even if they sell the exact same burger for a similar price. Add in packaging, napkins, cups, cleaning supplies, and the cost of food that gets thrown away because it sat too long under the heat lamp past the company's own freshness rules, and the money is already disappearing fast, long before anyone in a corporate office has taken a single cut. There's one more piece of the labor puzzle worth pulling out on its own because it's genuinely obsessive: the drive-thru. In the United States, drive-thru orders commonly make up somewhere around 60 to 70% of a typical fast food location's total sales, often more. That single number explains almost everything about how these restaurants are physically designed and staffed. The kitchen layout, the number of headsets, the specific menu board wording, even the shape of the driveway are all quietly optimized around one measurement: the average number of seconds between a car placing an order and that car pulling away with its food. Chains track this number obsessively, often down to the second, location by location, because a faster average time means more cars served per hour, which means more sales squeezed out of the exact same building, the exact same staff, and the exact same rent bill. Shaving 15 seconds off an average drive-thru time doesn't sound like much. Multiplied across hundreds of cars a day, across thousands of locations, it can be worth millions of dollars a year, industry-wide. That's why the drive-thru speaker, not the kitchen, is arguably the single most economically important piece of equipment in the entire building. And here's the part most people don't know: the restaurant you're standing in almost certainly isn't owned by McDonald's, the company. It's owned by an independent local business person, a franchisee, not so different from Jim Delegati back in 1967, who paid for the right to use that name, that recipe, and that supply chain. To become a McDonald's franchisee, the company's own disclosure documents put the total starting investment somewhere between $1 million and $2.3 million, including an initial franchise fee of $45,000 just to sign the agreement, before a single brick is laid or a single fryer is installed. And it doesn't stop there. Every single month for as long as they run that restaurant, the franchisee pays McDonald's Corporation a royalty of about 4% of gross sales, not profit sales, the total money coming in the door, plus another roughly 4% into a national advertising fund that pays for the commercials you see during the football game. Those two numbers alone mean that before a franchisee pays a single employee, buys a single pound of beef, or covers a single utility bill, close to 8 cents of every dollar that crosses the counter is already spoken for. Here's the detail that surprises almost everyone, even people who eat there every week. In a large share of locations, McDonald's Corporation also owns or controls the land and the building itself, and charges the franchisee rent on top of the royalty, often structured as a base rent plus a percentage of sales above a certain threshold. Put the royalty, the ad fund, and that rent together, and McDonald's Corporation can be collecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% of every single location's sales, guaranteed, whether that location has a great year or a terrible one. The franchisee absorbs almost all of the risk. The rent and the royalty get paid either way. It's part of why people who study the company closely sometimes describe McDonald's less as a burger company and more as one of the largest commercial real estate operations in the world, one that happens to sell hamburgers on the side to keep the tenants profitable enough to keep paying rent. The company's own financial filings show real estate and rental income as an enormous and remarkably stable share of total revenue year after year, regardless of what's happening in the beef market. And in case this sounds like something unique to one company, it isn't. Nearly every major fast food chain runs on some version of the exact same structure. Burger King's Whopper is sold through a nearly identical franchise model, with its own royalty and marketing fund percentages. Wendy's, Taco Bell, KFC, and dozens of other chains you'd recognize instantly all license their name to independent local owners in exchange for a recurring cut of sales plus rent in many locations. The exact percentages differ slightly from brand to brand, but the underlying machine, franchise fee, ongoing royalty, advertising fund, and often corporate-controlled real estate is essentially the same blueprint, copied and refined across the entire industry for more than half a century. Which means the Big Mac isn't really a story about one burger or even one company. It's a case study in exactly how the entire fast food industry actually makes its money, using this one extremely famous sandwich simply because it's the easiest example to hold in your hand. That royalty and rent relationship hasn't always been friendly either, and one fight in particular shows exactly how much tension sits underneath the surface of a $6 burger. For years, McDonald's pushed a heavily promoted dollar menu, selling certain items for around $1 to draw customers in the door. Corporate loved it. Cheap items pull in traffic, and traffic sells other, more profitable items alongside it. Many franchisees hated it because they were the ones actually absorbing rising labor, rent, and beef costs on items priced low enough that they sometimes made close to nothing on each one sold or lost money outright while still owing the same royalty percentage on top. That tension became public friction for years between the corporate office and its own franchisees. And it's a big part of why the ultra-cheap value menu eventually evolved into pricier, more flexible promotional deals instead. It's a small, very concrete example of a much bigger truth. The franchisee and the corporation are technically partners, but they don't always want the exact same thing, especially when it comes to what number appears on that menu board. And speaking of that menu board, even the way it's laid out is quietly engineered. Notice that a Big Mac by itself, a medium fries by itself, and a medium drink by itself, priced separately, often add up to noticeably more than buying all three together as a combo meal. That's not a coincidence, and it's not generosity. It's a well-documented pricing technique, sometimes called a decoy or anchor price, showing you the expensive individual prices first makes the combo price feel like an obvious win, even though the combo is still priced to be comfortably profitable on its own. Combo meals also solve a second problem for the restaurant. They push customers toward higher margin items like fries and soft drinks, which typically cost the restaurant only a few cents to make alongside the lower margin burger itself. A large soft drink might be one of the single most profitable items on the entire menu, precisely because it's mostly ice, water, and syrup. Every combo meal sold is quietly doing double duty, making you feel like you got a deal while nudging the restaurant's overall profit margin upward at the same time. Now here's where this stops being trivia and starts being genuinely useful. Because this exact sandwich, made almost the same way, is sold in more than 100 countries, and it costs a different amount in every single one of them. Economists actually use that fact on purpose. Since 1986, The Economist magazine has published something called the Big Mac Index. The idea is simple. Since a Big Mac requires roughly the same ingredients, the same labor, And the same real estate almost everywhere comparing its price across countries, converted into a single currency, gives a rough, informal snapshot of whether a country's currency is overvalued or undervalued compared to the US dollar. If a Big Mac costs far less in one country than in the United States, once you convert the price into dollars, that's a signal the local currency might be undervalued relative to what people there can actually afford. If it costs far more, the opposite. It's not a scientific instrument, and it was invented partly as a joke by a financial journalist looking for a fun way to explain a dry economic concept. But professional economists still reference it today, nearly 4 decades later, because it accidentally captures something real. Local labor costs, local rent, local taxes, and local import rules all get baked into that one single, comparable price tag everywhere in the world at the same time. There's one more cost that barely existed a generation ago, and it varies enormously depending on which country the Big Mac was sold in: packaging and environmental compliance. Many countries and cities now charge fees, taxes, or impose strict requirements on single-use packaging: the wrapper, the box, the cup, the straw. Some markets require restaurants to use recyclable or compostable materials that cost noticeably more per unit than plain plastic or foam ever did. Others charge a small environmental levy per item sold or per kilogram of packaging waste generated that gets folded quietly into the menu price long before you ever see it broken out on a receipt. None of that is a large slice of the total price on its own, often just a few cents per order. But it's a good reminder that the $6 you pay isn't only responding to beef markets and rent. It's also responding, in real time, to environmental policy decisions made by governments that have never once appeared on a McDonald's earnings call, in dozens of different regulatory environments simultaneously, all landing on the exact same sandwich. It's also useful for something closer to home: watching your own money lose value over time. The price of a Big Mac in the United States has climbed for decades, tracking, and at times outpacing, general inflation. Back in the late 1960s, when Jim Delegati first sold it in Pennsylvania, it went for well under $1. Today it's several dollars almost everywhere in the country. Some of that increase is simply inflation working exactly as economists expect it to, but some of it reflects the specific cost pressures we just walked through: rising minimum wages, rising commercial rent, rising cattle and wheat prices, all landing on the same 6-inch sandwich. Compare a McDonald's menu from 30 or 40 years ago to today, and you're looking at a surprisingly detailed record of exactly how much more expensive it has become to pay workers, rent buildings, and raise cattle in that same span of time. The burger is, in its own strange way, a running economic diary, printed on a menu board instead of a spreadsheet. So let's zoom out from one burger to the whole restaurant and ask the question every franchise owner actually has to answer before they sign that $1 million agreement. Is this actually a good business to be in? In the optimistic scenario, a well-run, well-located McDonald's franchise can generate somewhere around $3 million a year in sales, with franchisee profit margins commonly estimated in the range of 10 to 15% after paying royalties, rent, labor, and food costs. That can put several $100,000 a year into the owner's pocket, a genuinely strong return on a 7-figure investment, especially across multiple locations, which is exactly why many successful franchisees end up owning 3, 5, or a dozen restaurants instead of just one, spreading that same playbook across an entire region. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong at once, none of them dramatic on their own. Labor costs rise faster than menu prices can follow, because raising prices too aggressively risks losing customers to a competitor across the street. A new drive-thru chain opens 2 blocks away, and pulls away exactly the price-sensitive customers who matter most to a thin margin business. Delivery app commissions, which can run 15 to 30% per order, eat into margin on a rapidly growing share of total sales because more and more customers now order through an app instead of walking in, and a single bad string of weather, a heat wave that keeps delivery drivers off the road, a storm that closes the drive-thru for a week, can knock out an entire month's worth of thin profit in a matter of days. Under those conditions, that same location can slide from a comfortable double-digit margin into a thin single-digit one, still profitable, but barely, and dangerously exposed to any single bad month, any unexpected repair bill, any regional beef price spike. Here's a concrete way to picture that gap. Two nearly identical locations, same brand, same menu, same base rent structure, 20 minutes apart in the same metro area. One sits on a high-traffic corner with an efficient drive-thru layout and a manager who has kept staff turnover low for years. The other sits in a slowly declining strip mall, half a mile from a newer competitor, with a revolving door of new hires who need constant retraining. On paper, both franchisees signed the exact same agreement, paid roughly the exact same franchise fee, and sell the exact same $6 Big Mac. 5 years later, one owner is opening a third location. The other is quietly wondering whether to sell. The gap between those two outcomes in one restaurant can be worth several $100,000 a year. And almost none of that swing shows up as a dramatic, visible event. No headline, no scandal, just slightly higher wages, a slightly slower lunch rush, a slightly heavier repair bill, and a slightly bigger delivery app bill, compounding quietly month after month until the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet looks nothing like the optimistic case anyone imagined when they signed that franchise agreement in the first place. So let's put the whole dollar back together one more time, all at once. Out of every $6 you hand over for that Big Mac, roughly $1 or a little less goes to the actual food. A larger share, commonly a quarter to a third of the total, goes to the people who cooked and served it to you. Another meaningful slice goes to rent, utilities, and keeping the building running. Close to 10 cents of every dollar is wired straight to McDonald's Corporation before the franchisee sees a cent of profit for themselves. And whatever is left over, often a relatively small sliver of the original $6, is the actual profit that makes the entire risk, the million-dollar investment, and the years of long hours worth it for the owner. So the next time you hand over $6 for a Big Mac, remember what you're actually paying for. Less than $1 of it is food. A big chunk of it is the people making and serving it. Another piece is the building you're standing in. And a slice of it every single time in every single country, whether the local currency is strong or weak that year, is quietly wired back to a corporate office that doesn't cook a single patty. That's not really the price of a burger. That's the price of a system. The same system, wearing a different name, behind almost every fast food counter on the planet. And once you learn to see that system in one sandwich, you start seeing it everywhere, in your coffee, in your phone bill, in every single everyday thing you've never once stopped to actually take apart. That's exactly what we're going to keep doing here. See you in the next one.